Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm really excited to share with you this tutorial for a vintage memory journal. I'm doing covers, but there are actually two different compositions in this tutorial that you could do on an art journal page or on a different substrate other than what I'm working on. So stay with me. So I'm going vintage and I'm starting off with putting down a layer of vintage printables. The cover here has been gessoed because it's dark, even though I am covering all of it. And I'm just using a mix match of these printables. Where do you get these printables? There are tons of them free on the internet. You can print them off. You can go to bookstores, you can go to thrift stores and get your own. But later on, I'm going to show you another way to get that vintage background look if you don't have vintage printables. Now here, my goal is to get different vintage tones, some dark brown, light browns, whites, creams, and using papers of different weights. That gives different amounts of texture, different amounts of interest to your background. Instead of doing a whole lot of stamping and stenciling on this, like I often do to add interest to the background, the vintage printables are adding that to it. I also have some tea stained papers here and some tissue papers that I've created in my stash. I want to cover and layer everything so no white space is left. There really is no right or wrong here, just covering it all up. And you want to see all those little bits of interest that are there. Every time I layer it up, it's going to be thicker. That's going to show up and that's going to add some texture to this cover. And I like my journal covers to have texture. They just feel good when you hold them. This is some tissue paper. If you don't get this kind of tissue paper, vintage tissue paper, what you can do is use some of your vintage looking stamps or stencils on pattern paper that is that color. It just adds so much to your backgrounds. I'm putting this all down with fluid matte medium. If you prefer, you can use gel medium, but I would stick with the matte finish because you don't really want that shine. So on one side, I'm doing the front of the cover and the other side is the back of the cover. The insides are going to be treated differently, and I'm going to show you the alternative to using vintage printables and getting a similar look because we all love options. And between the two of them, I'm sure you have something in your stash that you'll be able to use to get the vintage look you're going for. So now I want to add even more texture, and I'm using this linked tiles stencil and TCW modeling paste, and I'm putting it on. Now, because I'm going for texture, I'm not too worried if I get a perfect stenciling. I'm taping off the coiled part where the coils go through because I don't want to get modeling paste in there. Now I'm doing the back side here, taping off that coil so I don't get modeling paste in there. And I decide to put 3 bits of texture on here, kind of making that triangle. Now I looked back at this one and I didn't like it, and it's not dry yet. Because there's a coat of matte medium that put down the vintage printables, and because I acted quickly, I was able to scrape it off, use a baby wipe, and get rid of the modeling paste and redo it. And I left this in to let you know you can do that. And there's the baby wipe. Just be gentle. Worst case scenario, I might have had to replace some of the vintage printables, but again, when you're working vintage, you want grunge and imperfections. So if something ripped and tore, that wouldn't be so horrible. So I decided to put a little bit less, dot getting so boxy. The other one was just a little too square, a little too perfect. Just getting off the excess. Now, a little while ago, I made this mini zine and it was vintage. And I loved how this turned out. I loved the smooshing that I did. I loved the black focal image. And so I'm using this as a jumping start to what I'm going to do on this journal cover. And a lot of times in my art journal, that's where I get my ideas that I turn into mixed media pieces that I sell. I'm adding a little bit of gesso here, just blocking it off, just adding a little bit more texture, pushing back some of the background, but I'm being careful not to get rid of too much of it. And if I do, I grab a baby wipe and wipe it back. I want to see those vintage printables. That's what I want to preserve. That's part of the look I'm going for. So there's a lot of playing here, adding, taking away, until I get the look that I'm going for. Now, because I am working on all four surfaces, I'm trying hard to keep my work surface clean. So here I'm adding unbleached titanium and white gesso and spreading it in all the nooks and crannies of the modeling paste with the baby wipe. And again, my goal is I want to knock back some of the printables, but I want to be able to see some of that. That's the interest that I want. So the outside cover is dry. So now I'm working on the inside cover. And here's another way, as I promised, to get that look. So I'm still working with that same linked tiles stencil, but I'm going to start off and I'm just going to stencil right onto the gessoed surface with a makeup sponge. Now this looks really stark right now, black on white. But remember, I'm going to put layers of color on top of this. I'm going to add the white gesso, the unbleached titanium, as well as the smooshing. And the black part right now is going to be pushed back. Just keeping an eye on which is my front, which is my back. And again, because this is just pattern in the background, I don't even worry about making this a perfect stenciled item. In fact, because it's vintage, less perfect is more perfect. Now I have this numbers stamp from Ciao Bella that I got from Ninny's Napkins, and there's a link in the description box. She also carries the TCW stencils, so go and check out all her mixed media art journaling supplies. I love these stamps, this collection. It's become a fast favorite and it's perfect for vintage. So grab what you have. If you've got postage stamps or old script, anything that in your mind is vintage, you could put down at this level. Basically, we are putting the colors down or the patterning down that was on the vintage printables. So look at the vintage printables that you see online or the ones you can purchase, and then look for stamps that will give you that same look. So I'm back to the unbleached titanium. I'm going to add a little bit of brown because I didn't have any brown in here from the vintage printables. So I'm going to mix that in ever so slightly just to give me the tone, the different tones that I had in the front. And you can see from one side to the next how the unbleached titanium and that has really pushed back all the stamping and stenciling that I did with black. So it's very similar to the effect that we got on the front. I'm using a makeup sponge to apply it. You can use a brush, you can use your fingers. I don't want to go too terribly opaque, so I find the makeup sponge in conjunction with a baby wipe to wipe it back in case. So there we have the fronts and the backs, and they're very, very similar. I'm adding some French script here. And I'm just using black archival paint or ink, and just giving it time to dry before I add any wet medium on top. Or you can be impatient like me and use your heat tool. So now I'm going to smoosh, and I have a piece of acetate just from packaging, and I have some cadmium red, and I'm thinning it a little bit with water. And I should have thinned it a little bit more. As I kept playing with this and experimenting, when you think you have enough water, add more. I'm spraying it down. I'm lifting up some of the color. It's a little too bright. So here there's a lot of going back and forth, adding, deleting as we go. Now I'm using Prussian blue and smooshing. And here I'm spraying a little bit more water, and it's getting that to move. I like the soft watercolory look that it can give you. And then this is yellow oxide. Now when the yellow mixes with the blue, it's going to make green. When it mixes with the red, if it's still wet, it's going to make orange. And that's okay. Now at this minute, I admit to thinking this is just too bright. I didn't get the soft pastel-y look that I was going for. When I do the front, you're going to see I get there a whole lot easier. But again, this will showcase two different ways to pretty much arrive at the same place. So here I'm taking some white gesso, thinning it down, and wiping it back. This is muting those colors, and you can see from the left-hand side to the right-hand side the difference. So this is making it more pastel-y. Here's the second part that I do that pushes it back. I'm taking white with the link tile stencil. Now we already have that pattern, so I'm using it front cover, back cover, inside covers. I've used it with texture paste, I've used it with black paint, and now white. And this is just softening the color in the background, muting those colors, and giving me that soft, watercolory, vintage, faded look that I'm going for. So I'm really happy with it now. And I just keep adding more of this as I go. Now I'm on to the front. And now here I've added more water to my paint and get better results. And you just keep playing with it. And look, you can see how little bit of paint I've used here. And then I'm adding water to it while it's on there. Now you have to be aware this is paper and there's modeling paste, so you don't want to get that too wet. And here I'm allowing the paints to move a little bit. And I'm liking this. I always love the look of smooshing, but it's not something I do easily. So here I'm spraying a lot of water on and moving that around a little bit with my brush or my finger. And it's softening. It's giving a more of a watercolory look than what I had in the inside cover. And then lifting up some that I don't want. When everything is good, I dry it. So if it ends up too bright, you can use the coat of gesso over top to do kind of a whitewash, or while you're doing it, spray a lot more water on it and let it flow like I'm doing on the front covers. When I do a journal page and I'm doing the inside covers, I always do the inside first because I figure if I make mistakes and it's not as perfect, it's not the front cover. I completely love the background, the covers that I've created. Now I want my focal image, and I'm using this Magnolia Blossom stencil, again from Crafter's Workshop, and I'll be using, this is the 12-inch one. I also am going to be using the 6-inch one. And I'm using black acrylic paint and just stenciling on the focal point. You could use modeling paste here, but I chose to put texture with the linked tile stencil, and I'm keeping this flat. Love that dark, that contrast you get with the black stenciling. Here I'm just adding a branch because I elongated it. So if you're doing this and you just want to do an art journal page or you just want to do a canvas, you would just be doing this part or one of the inside covers because it ends up being fairly close to being an art journal page. I'm adding some of that script on here with the archival paint. And now I'm putting the linked tile stencil back on top where the modeling paste is and putting a layer of white. Now this is going to bring out the texture and the pattern that is there. Whenever I put texture back there, I really want to bring it out in some way, shape, or form. So you can put the stencil back on top of it, line it up, and use white. I could have used gold here. I could have used brown. I want it white because I want to also lighten the background. You can also rub the makeup sponge like I'm doing on top of the texture. Touching up some of the black that I got some paint on. And now I'm edging my cover with black. Basically, I'm treating the cover as an art journal page or as a canvas. I just really like the idea of usable art. So now that I'm happy with the front, I'm doing the back. And here I'm repeating those steps. I'm adding white paint. I'm lining up the stencil where the texture paste is and adding that. Every last bit. There are close-ups at the end of the backgrounds here with the vintage printables, how you can see all those details, all those layers that we've put in, you can see in the end. It's just absolutely scrumptious. So there are my 4 covers. I decided I want to add some bling, so I'm going to thin some gold paint. You need to mix it up quite a long time, add more water as it goes, and test the consistency before you go to put it on a page or on your project. Now here's where I recommend, I'm using Liquitex Basics and that works fine. When I've used Artist Loft or craft paint, it tends to glob. It doesn't last as long. So I highly recommend, you know, not using the cheaper paints. But if that's all you have, just don't mix it up too much ahead. I mix up a container of it and I have it to use. I just wouldn't do that with craft or cheaper paint. I'm covering up the Magnolia because I don't want to get gold on it. I want to keep those blacks black and bold. And where if I got some on there, I'm just going to touch that up with black paint. No worries. Now I stamped a sentiment on here and my camera didn't catch it. So I stamp with ink first to get the placement. And then I put paint on my 5x7 gel plate. I spread it out and I take my wooden stamps and press it in using that like a stamp pad, and then I press it down. And then I use a baby wipe to clean it right after. Now, it was very faded. And while I like that look, I did want the sentiment to stand out a little bit better. I did test it with black, and the black just did not look good in my mind. So here I'm just making it a little more opaque with the white paint. I'm using thinned white paint and my liner brush and just going over it. You could use a gel pen or a Posca pen here to do this. I just am more comfortable using the liner brush. It's faster and I feel and easier for me. But you do what works best for you. If your background was darker, I would probably leave the stamped image there the way it was. But it's because the background is so light that it wasn't showing up as much and I needed to make it more opaque. Now I'm turning this journal, this could be just a journal cover, but I'm turning this into a keepsake memory journal that you keep on your coffee table or displayed in a plate easel and write down things that you want to remember that happen in your life. You can get your guests to fill it in. So inside the cover, I'm basically doing another page and I am printing out the saying, the best things in life are the people we love, the places we go, and the memories we make along the way. And I'm printing that out onto tissue paper. I've taped the tissue paper onto the page and feed it through my printer. And then I cut it apart and put the tissue paper where I want it. And I always do 2 copies if I can fit it on the page, because inevitably something rips, something doesn't quite work, and I end up doing it again. Having it perfectly lined up, I'm putting a good coat of fluid matte medium. Here, the word I ripped it. I was too rough, and I have another one printed so I don't have to reprint for one word. When you put a lot of fluid matte medium on there, it does, the tissue paper goes pretty translucent and you really don't see it, especially when you have a light background like this. You may see where the tissue paper begins and ends if the background was a darker color. It's really hard to make it completely disappear with a dark background. Don't you just love that background? I'm sorry, I just do. So there we have the inside cover and the quote about making memories. Now, when I put this together, or before I put it together, I'm going to give it 3 coats of polyacrylic. I use a brush, paint it on, let it dry, and I do all sides. Now, since this is going to be a memory keepsake journal, I've printed out some directions. I'm selling this at a craft fair, and I will stick that on. I printed it out onto sticker paper. And then I decide, I'm going to add a little bit more to this. And this is where it turns into an art journal page. I grab my 6-inch Magnolia stencil. I could have used the 12-inch here had I thought of this before. I could have done another 12-inch Magnolia, the same one from the cover. But instead, I'm going to put 2 of the smaller ones, top and bottom corners, on here. And wouldn't this be a beautiful canvas or wood panel? If I was doing this as an art journal page or a canvas, I would add texture paste like I did on the front cover, and then add these little side things, and then the memory quote. Love, love, love. And then on the page, I'm going to use the sticker paper, put that down. I decide I'm just going to stencil a magnolia on here as well, just to finish it off. So there we have collect moments, then the inside cover. Oh, I just love this. And the back cover. And I decide, I'm going to add a magnolia spray on the back as well. That's a great thing about designing your own covers. You can add as much of these little details that make it special. So close-ups of the finished project are coming up. My plan is to, if this doesn't sell, is to display my memory journal on a plate stand like this, and then reach for it, and whenever I feel like it, add what's been going on. What are the moments that I want to remember? And then every New Year's Eve, we can read through it and remember all the great things that have happened. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you give this a try, whether you make a journal like I did, or whether you make an art journal page or a canvas. Give me a thumbs up, ask me a question, give me an idea. Until next time, go get creative.